Hey everybody. So, valve clearance adjustment. If you've ever looked in the shop manual for your Honda Prelude, you've probably noticed that under the maintenance items there's an item called valve clearance adjustment, and that sounds like something that's really hard to do. Lucky for us, it's actually not that difficult, and today we're going to go through it on this car. This is a 1991 Honda Prelude. This same procedure would certainly work for any of the other third-gen Honda Preludes, and certainly for other Honda cars, other Preludes. It's really no different. It's not that difficult, but it does require that we remove the valve cover and a few other things to kind of get access to the valve adjusters. So I will move the camera around as I go and hopefully give you a good idea on how this can be accomplished. To start out, tools will be pretty basic. To get the valve cover off, we're going to need some pliers, mostly just to get the hoses off, and also a ratchet with a 10mm socket on the end of it. I'm using a deep socket, shallow one would work fine, and I don't think you'd need the extension either. So pretty basic tools to get started. Later on we will need some more wrenches, and a torque wrench too is required for this job. So if you don't have one of those, probably best to go get one before you start up something like this. Won't take that long to do, but it will take us a little while to get the valve cover off because there's some wires and hoses and a big harness that's kind of holding it down right now, not to mention a few nuts and bolts. So we'll get started right away. If you're looking for the instructions on how to do this, they're found in the shop manual, which you can download almost everywhere, and it's page 5-8 entitled Valve Clearance Adjustment. They recommend that you do it when the engine is cold. Obviously that's because a warm engine, the parts will have expanded a little bit, and so make sure that when you do attempt this that you've let the car sit for a little while so that it can cool down. Okay, I hope that you can see everything okay from this angle. Like I said before, the first thing that we need to do is get the valve cover off the engine. In order to do that, there's a number of these small 10mm nuts that are around the perimeter, as well as one in the center. There's also one underneath this harness, so we'll have to get this harness off. That's actually one of the hardest things to remove for this particular procedure. And then, of course, there's the spark plug wires, got to get them off, and we got to get these hoses out of the way as well. So let's get right to it. To start off, I'm just going to get the spark plug wires out of the way. They're nice and easy to remove. Just grab, pull, that's the number 1, 2, 3, and number 4 cylinders undone. And then you can just take them and get them right out of the way. We don't want them to get dirty or get in the way while we're removing all this other stuff. So just take them and pull them off to the side. Fortunately, they're all measured lengths, so you won't have any trouble remembering which one goes where later on. The other thing I should probably mention at this point is that before you attempt this procedure, you should definitely disconnect the battery. And the reason for that is that we will be disconnecting the one of the cables from the alternator, which can give you a pretty good spark if you're not careful. So let's start with the hoses for now, get them out of the way. This is the positive crankcase ventilation hose. This little L-shaped valve here in the end, plastic, is the positive crankcase ventilation valve. So all we need to do, that actually just pulls out, and you can just hook it behind the throttle cable there. This is another breather hose for the valve cover, and these hose clasps, usually with some pliers or something, you can just squeeze them, move them off the thick part, and then from that part it's just a matter of pulling off the hose, which not surprisingly is seized. Another place where pliers come in handy. Be gentle with your hoses, try not to fray them as you're taking them off. they'll likely be a little bit stuck if they've been on there for a while. But then once you get them, they come right off. So there, the hoses are free. The next thing we got to get rid of is this ground wire. It's going to get in our way, so we'll just take these fasteners out. There's a bolt here, and incidentally it also helps hold this harness casing on. And then there's this one as well. So these little nuts here, there's a lot of them. I'm not sure quite how many, but around the perimeter of the valve cover you'll need to remove all of those. Keep your stuff organized. We can just put the ground cable over there. For now it doesn't have to be in our way. And put your nuts and bolts someplace safe out of the way so they don't get lost. One thing to note is that as you take apart these nuts that hold the valve cover down, a lot of them, probably all of them actually, have this little plug. It's kind of like a washer with a seal attached to the bottom of it. You don't want to lose those. They just kind of help hold the valve cover down. Those go with each nut, so we'll keep track of those as we go. So I'm just going to keep working on this, and we'll see how quickly we can get this thing off. Another one over here. And we'll just make a mental note that bracket for the spark plug wires goes there. There's also two of the nuts that we need to remove for the valve cover on the back side of it. A little bit harder to get there with the wires for the fuel injectors in the way, but a little bit of weaseling, you can get the socket in there, pull them off too. Careful not to lose them down the back side of the engine. They might go someplace it's pretty hard to get them back. No problems there. And one more. To get this off, it looks kind of tricky, but you can actually get the valve cover off if you take the two plugs out of the alternator. Let's get the big plug out of the alternator. Probably a green plug on your car. It'll be 4 or 3 wires depending on if you have a carbureted or a fuel injected model. And then we can pull this boot off the main lead on the alternator, and that's just a 10mm socket to get that out. And one thing to note is that I believe that there is a washer, on this nut that holds the contact on for the alternator. So be aware of that and careful not to lose it when it all comes apart. You can see now that the wires in the alternator are free to move about. If we then just grab, well, I pulled that one out already, grab the sides of these little clamps, we can pull them out and they just clip into the bracket that the alternator has on it. And there. It gives us a lot of play in this wire. And if we then start to pull it through, should be able to get enough height out of it that it can, there, it can swing free, and we can get access to the nut that is underneath there. That one's actually a bolt, not a nut. And this one as well. Also a bolt. Okay, give it a bit of a tug, and up it comes. I've done that. And then there. Okay, just to review where we're at, we've successfully taken off the valve cover off the car. And you'll also notice at this point that I've raised the car off the ground and removed the wheel. So this is kind of, we're at the good starting point now to start the adjustment of the valves. So please check out part 2 of this video for the rest.